like open-ended questions, I find, oh, tell me more about that, or oh, how did you know that person, can sometimes help.
Or even, like for myself with mum, if it was a family member she'd forgotten, I would bring up a time where we were all together, and that would jog her memory. She'd say, "Oh yeah, yeah, so and so, so and so." You know. My mum, naughty type 2 diabetic, but loved the sweet stuff. So if we went ice cream, right, we go out for ice cream. But they were about actually. We're going to talk about it. It's actually about creating the memories because once they're gone, we want to remember them fondly as well, right? That's about that as well.
Hello and welcome to our latest dementia adventure, Unpacking Dementia Facebook session. My name's Ruth and I am the programme lead for our carer services here. I feel really privileged to be able to do the job that I do, and a part of doing these sessions is to really talk with you guys about your experiences and your journey supporting somebody living with dementia. I'm incredibly pleased to be joined today by Malcolm Gill, who is the founder of the charity Dignitate. So I'm going to hand over to you, Malcolm. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what your charity does.
Thank you, Ruth. So my name is Malcolm Gill. As Ruth said, I am the founder of an organization called Dignitate. What is Dignitate? We empower dementia caregivers within cultural communities by fostering a supportive network where education and shared experiences thrive. How did it come about? It came about from me being a carer of my mother who had vascular dementia for 11 years. Um, it came from me experiencing lots of highs and lows as a carer, having to understand dementia, which in a Southeast Asian community has a massive stigma around it, because it's still seen as a mental health condition as opposed to the neurodegenerative condition it is. So I had to learn about dementia, educate myself about dementia, and then at the same time handle my mum who was going through all these things that she didn't understand. So that's what Dignitate is. It's about understanding dementia, education, awareness, supporting so you can give your loved one the best care.
Amazing. Yeah, and I think when we first had conversations, we found that our two organisations really, really aligned in the importance of that understanding and supporting somebody. So thank you for joining us. Before we start today's session, I'm just going to do a quick bit of housekeeping. So please, please, please feel free to ask any questions or any experiences. Do share them in the chat. If you're asking any questions, we will absolutely do our best to answer those as we go through today's session. However, if we don't quite get to yours, don't worry, we will be coming back to them and we will respond accordingly after today's session. I'd really quickly like to thank Right at Home for sponsoring our Unpacking Dementia series. They've been an amazing sponsor of ours and we've got some really exciting partnership work coming up with them throughout 2025. So today's session is about memories and relationships, and fundamentally they make us who we are, don't they? They shape our identities, influence our emotional well-being. For our memories, they serve as such a rich tapestry into our past and connect us to experiences and all those lessons that we've learned as we've grown up. When we've got those relationships that provide that essential social support, often fostering feelings of being loved and belonging. So together they really, really enrich our life, offering comfort in those difficult times. Now, we know that when a diagnosis of dementia is given, and actually as that progresses, it can be really, really important to change how we engage with the person we're supporting. And that can actually be really hard, can't it, Malcolm? I know that you had experience of this when you were supporting your mum, didn't you?
Yeah, engaging with mum was difficult, because we're going through those kind of phases of dementia, right? So she went through, when it was first diagnosed, she didn't understand it, so she was agitated.
Yeah,
Um, we were getting aggression to a certain point, physical. So it was how to kind of find ways and techniques of calming her down.
yeah.
She as a person, she's all of a sudden forgetting things, not understanding things. Things are a bit blurry. Um, so it was trying to find ways to calm her down,
Mhm.
is what I'll say to you. So it was really um,
It's
difficult.
challenging,
It's
yeah.
challenging.
I think it's challenging to, remember the person that's brought us up. I mean, often when
Exactly.
we're in these circumstances, in
Yeah.
fact, more often than not, we're supporting somebody who's been such a big part of our life. If it's a parent like yourself, and my grandparent, I supported my grandfather, I'd known that person my entire life. And if it's a partner, it's certainly the majority of a life, isn't it? So, yeah, it's really, really hard to just engage with somebody, but change our engagement to meet their needs and keep them
Yeah.
happy, safe, and secure.
And that's a really good point, Ruth. Like, we're now taking care of somebody who took care of us our whole lives.
Yeah,
So that's a massive relationship shift, isn't it? Um,
100%. Yeah.
all of a sudden, we're now taking care of that. Me, in my case, my mum, who I, grew up really relying on. So it was a shift
It's
in
a
that
big
way. Yeah.
I think some of the things that I experience on the carer session we run as well is often from that perspective of the person living with a diagnosis.
Mhm.
That's a really difficult shift for them as well. I know there was times where I would need to support my grandfather and have conversations that actually weren't comfortable for him hearing from his granddaughters, finances, health discussions, and they're not conversations we plan for generally, are they? But yet we find ourselves on that journey having to go through this.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're absolutely right. Awkward conversations. But I think one thing that I took away from it all was we've got to meet them where they're at.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
We have this preconception of, oh no, but you've got to, don't you remember? Don't you remember? No, we just need to meet them where they're at.
Absolutely. And I think, and on that, I'm just going to touch on because there is a little bit of science behind that. And I know when I first started to learn about this, it made such a difference for my understanding and how to support my granddad. Because like yourselves, I would speak to him regularly and I would spend a lot of time sort of like, don't you remember? And with all the best intention, trying to jog that little memory. And then I learned actually for him, when I learned about the areas of the brain, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but a bit of light touch, the two areas that we really focused on was the hippocampus and the amygdala. And the hippocampus is that factual recall. It's a bit like, our click save area of our brain. So as much as I was saying to him, but don't you remember? Actually, his brain had not done that click save. It had gone in, but it wasn't processed. So it didn't matter how many times I said, but don't you remember? It just simply wasn't there. But actually, what did become really important was how something made him feel because the amygdala, that bit of our brain hidden in the limbic system, was really less affected. So he would remember how that conversation made him feel. And I know that was a bit of a game changer for me, like actually focusing on, was it important he remembered I'd call yesterday, or was it important that he knew I'd call because I needed to see if he was all right? Did you find that as well?
The difference, and a very important point there about the brain process and all of that, but it's how you left them feeling,
Mm,
right? Because remember, it's repeat, it's repeat, it's repeat. But, when in the early stage, you're pushing and pushing, um, don't you remember? And that leads to its own frustration with the person, doesn't it, Ruth? You know,
absolutely, yeah.
and that then leads into touch. But it's so important to leave them feeling in a way that they are feeling good, but also listened to.
Absolutely. I mean, I've had a quick question actually
Yeah.
come up on the chat from Paula, and she said, is there ways of managing her dad's frustration because he struggles to recall names, peoples, and places, and it really upsets him? And I think it's a really valid point. Often we either think, oh, the person living with dementia might not recognise that they're having those challenges, or that that they're not remembering. But often I found, certainly for my grandfather, like Paula, he was recognising, and it's really, really frustrating. I know I've spoken to many carers about this and I'm always spoken about rights and wrongs. And I don't think there is. It's about supporting that person in a way that keeps them happy. Would you agree?
Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. Think about the times when we sometimes forget someone's name, right? Imagine that multiplies. So it absolutely is. It's about, there's no right and wrongs, Ruth. It's about
No.
adapting to the situation. You know your loved person with dementia more. What can you do to help?
I mean, I would say people often say, should I prompt somebody? And again, if that's helpful, by all means do. By
Yeah.
all means. But actually, if you're noticing, if you're prompting somebody, that creates agitation. Things like open-ended questions, I find, oh, tell me more about that, or oh, how did you know that person, can sometimes help, because that can make a huge difference to that access.
Or even, like for myself with mum, if it was a family member she'd forgotten, I would bring up a time where we were all together, and
Mm.
that would jog her memory. She says, "Oh yeah, yeah, so and so, so and so." You know.
Yeah, Absolutely. And again, moving on from this, Andrew has got in touch and he said actually it's more about the frustrations of needing to do things like washing those household chores, but not remembering. How do you offer practical help to somebody when they're fiercely independent? Um, I'm gonna, at the end of today's session, I'm gonna pop a link in the chat to an article actually that I think is really helpful. It's on the Alzheimer's Society and it's called How to Offer Help When Help Is Not Wanted. Because I think it's such a common experience and it goes back to what we were just saying. It's that relationship dynamic, isn't it? I don't want my kids to tell me how to do the washing and how to do the cleaning. Now, at the moment, I'm hoping they don't need to. That isn't going to fundamentally change for me, is it?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Imagine how that person feels like their whole life. They've been independent. Um, some of the families we help, males can be a very tricky one, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Full of
Yeah.
pride, right? Full of pride. So, but it's what works. It's kind of trying
Mm.
different things to see what works best for your
Now,
unique.
do you know? Absolutely. I know a couple of things that have really helped, and they're not right for everybody, but things like visuals or tech can really help. So, timetables, writing on a whiteboard, just little gentle reminders.
Yeah,
I worked with an amazing family, and actually, for them, what worked was Alexa. So, they would set reminders on Alexa. So, say on a Wednesday, at 10 a.m., Alexa would remind, have we done the washing today? And I think
yeah,
sometimes it takes away that agitation because it's not actually that dynamic then. It's not me reminding you to do the washing. It's just a
something
little
else.
reminder.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. We work with a family where the fridge was the reminder. So everything went on the fridge.
Yeah.
Um, and the gentleman would, we'd sit with him and do it as a kind of creative session, his timetable, basically.
Yeah.
But he loved his food. So he was always going to the fridge. So that always, every time he's like, oh, I've got to do that, I've got to do that. So it's about finding those personal ways, Ruth. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I think never ever be afraid to bring in, people a little bit more external to that circle.
Yeah,
It's often really hard to hear, isn't it, from your nearest and dearest what you should be doing. We don't always take too kindly to that. I
totally.
know I had a brilliant relationship with my grandfather's neighbours. They'd lived next to him for years. But
Mm.
actually, if I needed sort of, a real message getting across that he needed help with something, he wouldn't hear it from me, but he would hear it from them. So, building that rapport with
Yeah.
extended family and friends can be absolutely game changer. So everybody's got the similar message. I find really helpful. Did you find that with your mum?
Yeah, yeah. It takes the emotion out of it, Ruth, is
Yeah,
what I'm gonna say, right? Because you're emotionally tied with my mum. And like you're so right, my mum would be a bit of a nightmare with me. But if somebody else came in the house, she was lovely. She was making them tea and biscuits.
yeah.
I'm like, you never give me. But on my turn as well, it was, it takes the emotion out, which is what's most important.
Absolutely. And I think what's also key to really understand is that, when we're living with dementia, it is a complex brain disease. There's no two ways about it. And it's fluctuating. So what might work one day might not work another. Like accessing those memories, that we was talking about right at the start. I know that I've worked with people and sometimes they can access really quite recent memories, but actually sometimes as that brain fluctuates, as that dementia fluctuates, that becomes more challenging. So I think it's really, really key to understand that adapting our approach becomes essential, doesn't it, when we're supporting somebody, rather than relying on that cognitive function to build those relationships.
Yeah. I mean, look, as I mentioned earlier, everyone's dementia is unique to themselves and their family. And
Mm,
it's about finding ways around that. As you know, the analogy of the bookcase rocking, you know, back and forth.
yeah,
The recent memories are going, but the base is the long-term memory. So that's what they kind of is the safe thing. But then, the trajectory of dementia isn't this, downward slope. It goes along and then boom, we fall,
yeah.
and then it plateaus and then it falls. So it's complex. It's complex. And we're still finding out about it now, aren't we? We
We
have.
are. There is so much research going on. And I think that's a brilliant thing. I think the more we learn, the better we can support somebody. I know that some of the things that have really supported reminiscence and memories when I've worked with people has been photo albums and music. I think it taps into that area of the brain that is less affected, that amygdala, isn't it? And I think all of us can, look at a photo and smile and remember back and hear a piece of music and it takes us back to where we were. So did you find that was really helpful
I
for
find
them?
I ended up using, and again, mine was, everyone's is personal, but I found a combination of things, right? So it was um, films, all right?
Yeah,
Yeah, the big thing. Smells.
yeah.
Yeah, smells, the five senses, right? Smells, sight, touch. Um, my mum, I used cooking because growing up in an Asian household, my mum was always cooking. But I would use cooking as the calm her down, come together, bit of exercise for her hands, because joints kind of drying up, don't they? So, but as soon as she would smell me doing
Mm,
the basis of a curry, she'd be up
hmm.
out of bed in the kitchen straight away. Otherwise, she wasn't moving out of the bed.
Yeah.
But she'd want to be in there with me, and we'd be doing it together, and it was a lovely experience.
It is. And do you know what? I think some of the benefits of that as well is it creates that meaning and purpose. I think often we need that meaning and purpose to keep ourselves busy, don't we? So finding little ways to engage and share experiences is absolutely key, isn't it? And that creates some of those newer memories. Now, it might be, and I'm sure there was times for you that your mum might not necessarily have made that link of we were cooking together, but I'm sure that she'd have taken to heart the experience you shared together and how that made her feel.
It wasn't just her, it was me as well, though, right? It's
100%.
beautiful memories that I have with my mum. Cooking, my mum, naughty type 2 diabetic, but love the sweet stuff. So if we went ice cream, right, we go out for ice cream. But they were about actually, we're going to talk about this, it's actually about creating the memories because once they're gone, we want to remember them fondly as well, right? That's about that as well.
And I think that's really tough. I know that we've had a question in about actually struggling to remember the person before dementia. And a lot of that comes from we become carers. We become that sole person. Our job is to look after that person, make sure that they're okay day to day. And
Yep.
one of the huge privileges I get when I'm on one of our dementia adventure holidays is taking away that pressure of caring. Being able to do that day to day, make a cup of tea, think about breakfast, what have I got to do? And actually support somebody to become that loved one for a better term, that partner, that son, that daughter, because you're absolutely right, Malcolm. You need those memories as well, and those really important smiles and things that you enjoy together.
Yeah, well, our thing with dignitate is, we forget, we don't realize that we as carers are the invisible patients
Yeah,
as well. And rightly so, so much is the focus is on them, but then we suffer as well. Respite is essentially what it is, right? So being able to provide those moments of respite are, fundamental and those, self-care. We don't get time to self-care,
yeah.
do we?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I've got an interesting question here from Andrew I'm going to put to you and see what your thoughts are on this. So, both of her parents are living with dementia, which has got to be an extremely tough journey. But her mum doesn't understand the frustrations that her dad has when he's living with Alzheimer's. And her dad gets frustrated with the demands that she puts on him. So, that's really complex dynamics there, isn't it? Do you have any suggestions on how to explain to mum that dad is also struggling?
I think it's about getting you know, mum, when you've both got both parents with you, you're in the middle, right?
Yeah.
Pardon the pun, but if it was me, it's like Malcolm in the middle, right?
Yeah.
Um, but then, it's about trying to explain to mum is what I say when you have that, because there'll be, there's touch points in the day, isn't there, where
Yeah.
they're kind of aware, right?
Yeah.
Um,
I'd
maybe
say to
that
pick in
point
the moment, isn't it?
is picking the moment, and that point, I wouldn't suggest doing it towards the evening because you may have a bit of sundowning coming in, right?
Yeah.
First thing
Yeah.
in the morning, not, but usually, 11 to 1-ish is your gap, isn't it? If they're not already sleeping. Um, but I do feel for Andrea there. My heart goes out to you. That's complex.
It is really complex. And again, do you know, one of the things that I can't advocate for enough is reaching out to local services.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm well aware, as I'm sure you are, Malcolm, it can be a real postcode lottery out there. Um, but I think what's key to understand is there are support services out there, and meeting others in the same place as us can be absolutely key. Often it's not even about finding a solution, but it's about finding somebody else who goes, do you know what? That's really hard. I tried this. Do you want to give it a go? Local carer services, organisations such as yourself can be absolutely fantastic places to network, meet others, and find those little suggestions that might just give you that key on that day. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's all about, I mean, it's what we're about, isn't it? Yourselves as well. Ruth. It's about the community of carers, right? Sharing their experiences or being in a community where you know
Mm,
that everyone's going through the same thing and
yeah,
everybody can suggest. You don't have to take it. It might not work, it might work, but it's about, well, maybe because like you so rightly said, health services support is a postcode lottery, isn't it?
it is absolutely.
Um,
And I can see it in the chat already. We've got people saying that, Rachel says that her mum uses the fridge, just like your gentleman that you supported did. And just those little knickknacks, those little tidbits of information can make all the difference. Another one that crops up all the time from Cheryl here is, why is it that my mum will be nasty to me and not
yeah,
others?
yeah. Interesting. And I was on a call just before this with one of our support calls with the same thing. Same thing. And it's because you are the most recognizable. You're
Yeah,
in, you're with them every day. Um, I went through it, Ruth. Yeah.
yeah.
It's because I'm that constant in her life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think actually this is one where it's often much harder being
Yeah.
in this carer's position.
Oh,
I think when it comes to reminiscence, memories, relationships, actually as carers, it's a real tough one for us because it's so fluctuating for the person we're supporting. And often I think the reality is we try harder for other people. I know if you think about it in layman's terms, when you go out and you see your neighbours in the street, and they say, how are you? We always very politely go, oh, I'm great, thank you. We never go into the crux of how we're really feeling. Yet with a family member, we feel comfortable to do so.
mm,
On the flip side to that, what I would say to you, Cheryl, is make sure you do take some time out for yourself. That is a tough position to be. Do seek support from others, whether that's just a coffee with a friend to offload through to, maybe look at befriending services to come in and give you that break that you need. We know respite is absolutely essential. We also know it can be exceedingly difficult to find. So, again, those carer services, those organisations in your local area will be able to help you look for that, but making sure that you're, looking after yourself as well when you're up against that. And trying to see and remember what is dementia and what is the person. That person is still in there somewhere, but those frustrations can become really prevalent, can't they?
fantastic point. What is dementia? And that person still isn't there. Really good
Yeah,
point, Ruth. Yeah. Because as carers, we're like putting out fires all the time, aren't we?
yeah,
We're reacting
absolutely.
emotionally, but yeah, great point. It's important to remember that that person is still in there.
Yeah, 100%. And actually, on that, I'm going to go through and I'm going to ask you about when you were caring for your mum. Did you find there was a lack of appropriate support and resources that really could have assisted you with like that reminiscent work and enhancing those meaningful moments together? Did you find there was anything available to you, or was it all just kind of learning as you go?
It was learning as I go. I mean, as you know, the dementia, the NICE dementia pathway is extremely fragmented anyway, right? And then kind of gets put onto, um, even though you'll get your adult social work, it then gets put onto the voluntary sector almost, right? For you to go into those services.
Mhm.
Um, And we know what's happened with that since after COVID, right? Those are drying up and money's gone.
Yeah.
There wasn't much out there. I stumbled on things, is what I'm going to say to you.
Hmm.
I met, the only way I can describe it is I made things work.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand that. I really, really hope, and I think one of the reasons I wanted to work with you today and in the future is because we align so much. I think both you and I feel really strongly about those challenges and just ensuring that information is in one place for people when they
Absolutely.
need it. Yeah, absolutely. I've got one last question that I'm going to approach, and that's from Grace. And she's popped, how can I encourage my mum to enjoy the activities that she used to? And it's a tough one, isn't it? Because I think sometimes I don't, again, there's no right or wrong to this. One of the things that we always encourage carers here at Dementia Adventure to do is think about the same but different. So to put that into some context, I've worked with so many people on holiday and they go, I used to love reading a novel. Well, if your brain's not retaining that your interest is going to dwindle from that. And we would suggest something like maybe looking at short stories.
Mm.
That might become a little bit difficult as dementia progresses. Magazines, newspapers. I had a wonderful gentleman on a holiday who was a fisherman. So we took some fishing magazines away with us. And do you know what? For the most part, I would sit with him. I don't know much about fishing, I must admit, but I learned a lot from him just by opening this up and letting him talk about his experience. So it was the same but different. Still, sometimes just holding that magazine, holding a book, is still where that enjoyment is. So thinking about that, can that be helpful? Was that something you were able to do with your mum as well?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We have this thing with we always are like, but she used to love doing that. She used to love doing that. And you made such an important point, Ruth. Some of the brain isn't working as it should be. So we've just
Mm,
got to adapt, right? Like my
yeah.
mum used to love shopping in Marks and Spencer's, but towards the end she couldn't get out. So we made the garden her place, and she loved sitting there watching
Yeah.
nature. Loved it,
Yeah.
loved it.
Yeah. And I think it is being open to that change as well, isn't it? I mean, as you well know, at Dementia Adventure, any avocation for getting outdoors just brings it's such a boost to those happy hormones, those serotonin levels, those dopamine levels. So, if somebody's less engaged, maybe taking something outside into the garden can promote that. But don't be afraid to try something new. My biggest piece of advice to everybody supporting somebody is there's no such thing as failure. What we can learn is that isn't right at the moment, but never ever feel like you're not getting it right because dementia is ever changing. So I think that's really going to bring us to a bit of a close. But it's such a fascinating topic to talk about, and it's been an absolute pleasure to be able to do that today with you. So I'd just like to thank everybody who has joined us. There will be some information on our website about the things that we've discussed today, and like I said to you earlier, I will pop that link to that article about helping somebody when they don't want help as a part of the chat later on. If you have left a comment or a question in the chat and we've not got around to that, we will come back. I will be looking at those after today's session. But thank you so much, Malcolm, for joining us. It really is an absolute pleasure. And I'm just going to ask, have you got any final thoughts before we close today's session?
Now, thank you for having me.
You're
Um,
welcome.
and I want to touch on the most important thing you said. Nothing is wrong, when you're on your dementia journey.
Mhm.
Um, Try things. It may not work, but you can adapt, like you said, Ruth.
It-
Really great.
Absolutely. And, using those photo albums, music, whatever works for the person you're
Yeah.
getting to reminisce and engage is only going to support their well-being.
Yeah.
Keep going. You're doing a brilliant job. And thank you ever so much.